Hey, my friends, it's Matt. Hope things are going awesome in your world. Yesterday was Thanksgiving in my country. It's a beautiful holiday here. It wasn't my favorite growing up. I think that had to do with the color scheme. It's a very brown and tan holiday. It's very gourd colored, if you can picture that. And so when I was a kid, I guess it sort of reminded me that the green time of year was over, the outside playtime, and now we were into buckle down, short days, winter time. But as I've aged, I've come to like Thanksgiving way more just because of what it is and what it does to your heart, or what it's supposed to do to your heart. You think about the things that you're grateful for. You look back on the year, you look back on life, and sure, not everything's perfect, but it's meant to make you appreciate the things that are beautiful, the things that are redemptive, the things that you don't get to keep forever, that are always slipping through your fingers, that only God really gets to hold and to own, and that we borrow, rent, steward, whatever. And every year, I feel so much more inclination in my heart to lean heavy into what this holiday is about. And it seems like as the year goes by, my heart crusts up a little bit, like it's kind of calcified around the edges, lime metaphorically on the soul. And Thanksgiving comes at just the right time to soften the heart, because maybe you're different. For me, gratitude and judginess, gratitude and the whole world's burning down, everything's screwed up around, those two attitudes, they cannot simultaneously thrive in my heart. One's going to win, and that's it. And so Thanksgiving gives a gigantic boost to the gratitude side of things. And it's also very meaningful to watch other people go through that same process and reflect on that same thing. So I really like this time of year. And what would have been awesome is if yesterday you had woken up and the last golden leaves are falling from the trees and people you love are gathered at the home where you're at, and maybe you can smell the beginnings of Thanksgiving dinner being prepared, and you put some coffee or hot chocolate in a mug, and you think to yourself, I should go listen. There's a podcast that I listen to every day. I'm going to go see if they took the day off for Thanksgiving, or if they did a new episode. I'm going to go find out. You'd be like, oh, we made one. This is great. And you could have turned it on, and while your heart was being warmed by the scene I just described, your heart also could have been warmed by a description of the beginning of a beautiful ancient holiday that persists all the way to today, a holiday with feasting and expressions of gratitude. And you would have sat there and you would have thought, my heart truly is full. This is a perfect Thanksgiving. Thank you, podcast. Thank you, family. This is exactly what I needed. But you didn't get that because it didn't plan in advance. And so what you got instead was a podcast about a whole bunch of people being publicly impaled and then a giant political purge. My bad. But I'm going to see if I can make it up to you today. Just if you still have any of those embers in your heart that are still warm and that haven't been totally put out by the shopping nightmare that is Black Friday, then you just blow on those little and bring those back just a tiny bit, and I think you'll feel what I'm feeling as we get into the beginning of this awesome holiday that gets described in Esther 9. And what we discover is that Esther 9, which has been admittedly, kind of tough to work through up to this point, that actually one of the big reasons that we're going through all of that is not just to give the details and nail it down, but it's also a roundabout way of the author of the book of Esther getting to a point where they explain this holiday that lots of people were still celebrating at the time that this book was written, but that maybe some people were forgetting the meaning of. And one of the questions that people had about this holiday that commemorates the events of the book of Esther was, when are we supposed to celebrate that exactly? Because it seems like some Jews celebrate it one day and some Jews celebrate it another day. Why is all of it? And so this is what we get at the end of 16 straight verses of war and violence and difficult resolution to a difficult situation. Then we get this, starting in verse 17 of Esther 9. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. See, that's nice. You feel the embers just breathing back to life. Verse 18, the Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, man, that's a tough word. Let me try it again. That is why rural Jews, those living in the villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. You tracking with that? So out in the provinces, the first edict goes out, Haman's edict. It's horrible, and all of the Jews are fearful because there's not even a provision in there for them to defend themselves. This is state-sponsored genocide, which I guess they call democide, when a government kills its own people. And then not too long after that, they get another edict. This one is from a Benjamite. This is a Jew. And praise God, this new edict says we get to defend ourselves. And so optimism is stoked. There's a long wait before all of this settles out, and then it does. I don't remember the exact date. It's March, somewhere in the spring, that this would have played out when this actually went down. So everything happens out in the provinces in just one day, because those are the two edicts they had. The bad guys get to kill the Jews, and on the same day, second edict, the Jews get to fight back and defend themselves. So it makes sense that all just gets settled in one crazy, crazy day. But when it's over, it's over. You no longer have the blessing of the king to be engaging in these kind of violent hijinks. It's done. The allowance is done. Well, the dust settles, and the next day, out in the provinces, out in the satrapies, the Jews look around and they're like, awesome, we didn't die. And they high five and they celebrate and they feast. And maybe they had the feast already ready to go because they're like, we know we're going to win. Maybe it was more spontaneous than that. I don't know, but it happened. And so for them, the commemoration would be on the 14th day of Adar. They fought on the 13th, they celebrated on the 14th, and then they handed that on to their kids. The holiday, again, is called Purim. It's named for the poor. It's not the Hebrew word. Goral is the Hebrew word. Is it Babylonian? Is it Old Persian? Is it Aramaic? Wow, I knew this once when we talked about it a while back. Hey, not everything sticks. We're always learning. So whatever language it is, the pur is that dice that Haman cast, which becomes a metaphor for the providence of God. And so the Feast of Purim celebrates that's where it gets the name from. That is, this festival's going on at the time when the book of Esther is written, and some people are like, well, we celebrate it on the 14th. Oh, well, then you're probably descended from somebody who lives out in the provinces. But the Jews in Susa, however, they fought on the 13th and the 14th, and then on the 15th, they celebrated and made it a day of feasting and joy. So if you celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar, as you are reading the book of Esther back in the day, that would mean, we're descended from people who were around the citadel, and there was a second edict from Team Esther, Team Mordecai that went out to carry on the fighting for one more day, and that pushes everything back in terms of the festival for another day. So it kind of seems like the author is saying, hey, whichever day it makes sense for you to celebrate this thing on, there's a reason for it. You can see how you got there. It's almost like an attempt to reconcile the two different opinions on this, to explain how everybody can be sort of right at the same time, which is very interesting when you think back on what we've spent the last, 2 weeks looking at, the really difficult stuff in chapter 9. I mentioned several times that the author of Esther never seems to be apologizing for it or like, I'm so sorry that this happened. It was a difficult time. We had to do difficult. No, there's none of that. It assumes ancient Near Eastern sensibilities, and it assumes that it is the blood oath covenant obligation of any descendant or any survivor of anybody who dies in this kind of a blood feud. It becomes their job to kill the people who did the killing. So it's really interesting as we get here to verses 17, 18, and 19 about the days of Purim and when it's celebrated, to sort of have this epiphany, this realization that the author isn't worried about that, because the author's just trying to get us to this explanation of why the days are different. No, obviously we were supposed to defeat our enemies. That was done, and that worked out, and that was awesome. And I just needed to give you the whole story of exactly how that played, so that people in the provinces don't think that the Jews in Susa are getting it wrong or vice versa. There's a good reason for all of it. We're all on the same team here. I just think that's amazing. And like I said, what we need to talk about, I suppose, next time is what does this holiday look like, or what does it look like now? Because this is still celebrated. The book of Esther is still read every year amongst Jews as they celebrate this thing. And it's been very relevant as part of the rhythm of the spiritual life, the cultural life, the civic life of the Jewish people. Unfortunately, it's been very relevant for 2,400 years as they've gone through a lot of difficult things with enemies similar to Haman getting after them. All of that to say, this is a very different origin story to a celebration of Thanksgiving and feasting and joy than the origin story of the day of Thanksgiving that we celebrate in my country, but they have gratitude in common. And I think gratitude is balm for the soul, reorients us in very powerful ways. And so I really liked this part of Esther, and we'll look a little bit more closely at what this celebration was like and continues to be like next time around. All right, I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast exists because many of you kick in to make it happen, even though you don't have to. Learn more at thetmbh.com/support. We're grateful because that supports our family.